If you like this video, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell icon to get the latest updates.
Welcome to a new whoever has joined this session on the for the demo part of what SAP S4 HANA is all about. So let me restructure the session how it is going to go. I'm just going to give you what is SAP S4 HANA. So let me break down this into topics which is going to be discussed. So this being a demo session, which is the first session, which is more of what SAP S4 HANA is all about. So I'm going to break it down into 3 or 4 sections where I'm going to give first the intro, how we move from how SAP is moved from an ECC to an S4 platform. Then we're going to discuss what is the future of S4, right? So we're going to cover how S4 is going to help the businesses in order to address their pain points, and how future it's seen as a futuristic solution on the ERP side. Then we'll have a small system run through of this particular discussion that we are going to have. It'll be on a system run through to show how this S4 system is there. So then we'll have a Q&A session to have a discussion on the queries or such which is there, which needs to be addressed. Right. So before we start off the session, let me introduce myself. So my name is Ram. So I have around 15 plus years of experience. I've been working on the ECC space as well as on the S4 space. Yes, I am. I had done my initially I started off with SD, then I worked on multiple areas like SDMM integration, PP integration, where I have an APO integration. So that's how I was able to flex my muscles in terms of the models which I have worked on my previous assignments. So I've been associated with ZaranTech for almost more than 3.5 years now. I've been training multiple batches with people from an SAP and a non-SAP background attending the sessions. Yeah, we'll try to make it in such a way that even from a non-SAP background also, to a certain extent, they'll be able to align to the discussion that we have. But of course, in order to say S4 module is an advanced version, it's a slightly an advanced version of the existing ECC model. So knowledge on the ECC part is good enough to have, because whatever we discuss will be predominantly an extension of an ECC based structure, which is going to be discussed. This about myself. So before we start off with SAP S4 HANA, so let me run through. So 1 minute. Yeah. So let me give a glimpse of how this. So first thing is basically an intro part of in the SAP S4 side, right? So when you talk about S4 journey, or when you talk about ECC's journey in the R3 space, right? So first, if you see how SAP started, the purpose of SAP is basically started to integrate your business functions. When I say business functions, it could be an FI, inventory, HR, sales, right? They wanted to integrate everything so that they need to have one integrated solution platform, right? And this had to be on a real-time basis, right? It's more of an integrated setup where data is shared across multiple functional part of the company, which is basically needed for reducing the redundancies, right? And it had to be real time because the information which has to be entered into any particular application, it should be available across to everyone, right? And it should be available at all times. That's why it has to be on a real time basis, right? And they wanted to provide a standardized solution. So whenever the companies are building their own applications from scratch, so SAP was basically to build a software product that worked for many companies with set of something called as configurations. With that purposes, they started with an R1, right? R1 is basically, it's the first version. It started in 1972 and SAP started its journey, right? So then from R1 they moved to R2, right? So when they say R2, right? So R2 is basically because, so see, normally when you see, it all aligns to your IT computation era. When I say IT computation era, it is majorly because, so when you're moving from, because R1 and R2 was predominantly, R2 started in 1979. So this is basically a mainframe era of computing, right? So when that's where PC started gaining importance in this particular era. So they moved from, so R2 was basically aligned to having a client and server architecture integrated into one, right? So it is basically client and server on the R2 side. They're able to integrate, they were able to support major business functions in real time, and it was basically able to handle multi-currency and multi-currency applications. Okay, then we moved from a mainframe era to a desktop computing era. So desktop computing era started in late 1980s, right? And it went till 2000s, early 2000s, or when you say late 1990s, it went through. So that is when, in order to address this desktop computing, so that is when they said in 1992, they came out with the PC revolution coming in. They introduced this client server architecture, right? Where they were able to rewrite these applications. So they split it across 3 layers. That's why they call this as R3 structure. When I say R3 structure, they came out with the 3-tier architecture, which is your presentation layer. Just stop me if there is any clarifications. So I'll put everyone to unmute, so you can unmute yourself whenever there is a question. So I have a presentation layer, application layer, database layer. The 3-tier structure which came into existence. Well, I say 3-tier structure. So as part of the R3, so they wanted to evolve to the scale and the globalization. Right? So when they moved from the mainframe era, right? So because when you see mainframe eras, where mainframe computers were basically implemented on a single country or business use basis, which they wanted to align with. So that is why when they introduced this R3 gave a flexibility of having your application server, database server, and a presentation layer across the 3 tiers of the architecture. Right? So this was introduced in 1992. Right? Of course, then the Y2K problems came in. So all this, when talk about the early 2000s. So they wanted to integrate. See, you had core functions into the ERP. One is your sales, one is your manufacturing, one is your procurement, and of course the FI and your HR. But apart from that, a lot of latest solutions started popping up. Right? You had the core functions. When they introduced, they wanted to bring in something called as your SCM solutions, CRM solutions, PLM solution, product lifecycle management solutions, right? And your SRM, supply relationship management solutions. So all these things they wanted to integrate into the ERP, right? So they brought in a My SAP platform. In order to integrate all these things, they came out with the My SAP platform, right? This was in the 2004 because they came out with something called as your NW, NetWeaver integration. They wanted to have a middleware. This was seen as a middleware from the SAP's platform side, so that they can integrate all these things into the ERP integration. Right. So this happened. Then they came out with, in 2004, they came out with your ECC, Enterprise Central Component. Right. So when you talk about your R3, first is they came out with E versions 4.0 to 4.7. Now most of the companies have all migrated. but some traditional clients will be still on 4.6, 4.7, right? So they are on the traditional architecture, which is being supported by some service provider, though SAP is not supporting it. Service providers would be supporting it. Then they moved from an ECC platform. So from EE platform, they moved to an ECC platform, ECC 5.0, and you had a lot of EHP versions, enhancement packs. Then they moved from ECC 5.0 to ECC 6.0, again, which had your enhancement packs, right? So this has an integrate. This was integrated to your NetWeaver in order to integrate with your ERP, which had to integrate in turn with multiple new solutions, right? So they came out with the NetWeaver platform. So NetWeaver platform was maybe an IBM and Microsoft join hands. That's why they came out with the open integrated platform where they were able to integrate all this core solutions, right? So NetWeaver basically started off with 7.0 version. It started, then it becomes 7.5. A lot of multiple versions of it came in. That's why they were able to align this to the requirement. Okay. So now after 2004, they said, is the system good enough? Because see, from 1972, 1970, they came out with the R2. 1992, they came out with the R3, right? They said, is the system good enough to handle all the futuristic solutions, right? So when you talk about them, I said they were into the desktop computing, right? And then the internet era started, right? In the early 2000s, the internet era started, where internet started gaining importance. When they moved from an internet era, that's when suddenly a cloud computing came into existence, right? So with all these things coming in, plus your social media coming in, right? So which gave rise to something called as data, right? So data was not confined only to your desktop or a laptop, right? Because this where when data got generated from the mobility platforms. When I say mobility platforms, it could be through your phones, your iPads, or any tablet mode, because the form factors have changed. Form factors is no more a desktop or laptop. Form factor is the way you use a end computing systems. The form factors have actually changed. So that's when it started giving rise to data. So now you see data is seen as a new oil in the IT industry, right? Because it's seen as very strategic, because every company sees this as a strategic model for their business growth. That's the reason now data is seen as very sensitive and it is seen as very strategic for every business. So SAP started thinking, because everything is business data, right? What they're handling is all business data. So when I say my business data, is it good enough to be processed by my systems? Is it good enough to be processed by my system? So what they did is, in order to address this thing, they said, first let us form a team. So they organized a team and they said, how I can improvise it. Right. So they started analyzing how this existing system was in terms of my data. So when I say data predominantly is handled by something called as your database, right? DB. Right. So how this particular database was organized. So normally you see any database. So you had something called as, you have your processors, right? You have your main memory. You have something called as your auxiliary memory, right? So when you talk about auxiliary memory, it had your hard disk drives, right? It's more of a magnetic disk or solid state devices. It retains data when power is also off. Then main memory is accessed by your RAM, which is basically nothing but your random access memories. So random access memory stores the data and it retains data till the power is lost. And then you have your processor. You have your CPU processors, plus you have a cache memory. Right? Stores data or recent usages of data is stored by your cache memory. And this is very fast. So when the data gets accessed, the data has to move from your auxiliary memory to the main memory. Then this gets processed from your main memory. And from there, it has to be moving to the processor and it has to be right. The problem is when the data has to move from your hard disk drives or your database to your RAM, this is consuming almost 80 to 90% of the time. When it moved from the RAM to the CPU, it was consuming the remaining 10 to 20% of the time. Now, I said ERP has to follow the concept something called as real time. Right? When I say real time, many people argue is ECC system was it a real time? Right? Yes. When I say real time, see, you cannot blame the system because the systems are designed for that era of computing. See, now real time, the definition of real time is changing, right? The moment I need to, my system data is created in the system that needs to reflect in my reports, right? That is basically the power of real time that now the new definition of real time has been transformed. So almost 80 to 90% of the time, if it's consumed from data moving from hard disk to the RAM, so they said, why? What is the purpose of if achieving my real time if I don't address this issue? They said in that cases I will reduce my auxiliary memory, right? I'll store everything in my memory RAM itself, right? So that's why they said, let me remove this auxiliary memory into this. All the data will be stored in your main memory. All the data will be stored in your main memory. Okay. Now, having said this, okay, so now they were able to address this, and of late, what happened is the RAM or your main memory. Initially, it was very expensive, but of late now you see the prices have actually started coming down. Right from 2010 afterwards, the RAM price have started coming down. So I said this will be a viable platform for customers to store their data directly onto the memory rather than using their hard disk drives. Right. So that's where now you see for our mobile sets, all these things, we're able to buy RAMs, your memory cards at very affordable prices. Right. So imagine at an enterprise level, the same thing can be extended to enterprise where they can afford to store major things on their memory. Right. So that is where they said, I'm going to build a database which is going to be completely an in-memory database. Right. And this RAM is able to handle something called as calculations directly. Right. On the memory itself, calculations will be there on the fly. So that they hold this as an in-memory storage. And they said in-memory calculations. Right. So they said, what should I name this database? What should I name this database? Right. So you have your multiple databases like your MS SQL, DB2, a lot of databases were there. But I knew when I'm putting everything onto the memory, right? None of the databases were completely storing it on the memory. So I need to give a name to this particular database. Right. So that's when, because they said initially they named it as something called as Hasso's new architecture. So because Hasso Plattner was one of the founders of SAP, right? Hasso platform, they called this HANA, Hasso Plattner's new architecture. But then they said, okay, rather than naming this, they said, let me rename it as what is the purpose for which it is depend. What purpose was this database being named? So they said the same HANA can be renamed as high performance, analytical, appliance. Right? So it was Hasso Plattner's new architecture, who is one of the founders of SAP. So they said then they renamed this as under the purpose for which it is driven. It is for high performance analytical appliance. right? So it is used for analytical because see, as I said, everything is going to be on the real-time reporting, right? So normally in any business, they have something called a source of information to source of records. When I say source of information, the existing information in a database will be useful only if it is leveraged, right? Only if that information which is there in my database, which can be coming from multiple sources, either in my ecosystem or coming from external ecosystems. But only thing is that it makes sense only when it's converted into records, because your decision, day-to-day decision making is based on this records, or they call it as a reports, right? And these reports should have the real-time data, right? So in ECC, the question of real-time, as I was discussing, it was basically called as real-time, but that was designed for that definition of real-time, right? So normally how an ECC real-time was basically, so normally when you see R through and R3 structure, right? R1 and R3 structure, when they design this particular system, it was basically designed for recording the data, right? These systems were not aligned to analyze the data, right? And that's the reason in late 90s, they released something called as your BW systems. BW systems were integrated with R3 systems, and that was basically using for analyzing the data and making reports out of it. It is basically called as a reporting system, right? And BW system was handling initially designed for handling your simple analysis, and then it moved towards making complex analytics report. Right. So now, when I say R3 systems or your existing ECC systems were defined for storing the data. The data is all stored in the database as form of tables, right? These systems used to be integrated with your BW systems, right? And as I said, ECC systems, they are called as online transaction processing. It basically used for transaction entry. High volume transactions were being created. It was all stored in tables. And BW systems, it was all storing something called as cubical data, right? And this is basically used as a read-only system, right? You cannot go and it is basically integrated with ECC, pull the data from ECC, and you choose to reporting, generate reports, and it's optimized for all your queries and analysis. So the problem is when a data is created in this system, and BW system was pulling the data from your existing ECC system. See, when it's created one system, it's moved to the other system. That's where something called as your real-time integration gets lost here, because a data which is created here is not the one which the system is creating reports for, right? This will always be the reporting which is aligned to this system, right? And there is always a lag in, or there always something called as in the redundancy of data, which is moving from system 1 to system 2. Like for example, ECC system to BW system. They wanted to address this problem, the time lag which is involved here. They said, if I'm designing my new system, I should have my transactions as well as analytics integrated into one suite. So I said, let me integrate my R3 or my ECC structures, or may call it as a business suite now, integrate with the BW. Let me make one single system where transaction is created in the same system. At the same time, the reporting is generated using the set of samples in the same system, right? So they said, I'm integrating my transactions analytics into one single system. So that is when they define this HANA as a database, they said, I'm going to have my online transactions, online analytics into one single structure, right? And it's going to be completely an in-memory platform. It's going to be completely an in-memory calculation-based platform, storage-based platform, as well as the calculation-based platform, right? Now, when I say data has multiple things. How do you store the data? How do you process the data? right? Store the data, I said it is going to be an in-memory. Process the data, it's going to be in memory, right? And how do you process the data in the real time? Transactions as well as analytics are integrated. Okay. As I said, data is all stored in form of tables here, right? It's all stored in form of tables. Tables will have rows and columns, right? So ECC data or the traditional database is all aligned to storing the data in the row format, right? It was basically read and write was happening in the row format, right? So imagine a row. I have something called as, for example, I have a table which is having your customer, quantity, item number, material, right? So imagine if the data has to be accessed for finding one particular data. For example, if I'm passing a query saying what is the maximum quantity of one material which is being sold to one particular customer. Imagine if it's a row based, it has to go and read every cell in the particular table. And finally, it is to give me a result. Rather than that, they said, I'm going to break it down to the columnar table. So I have a column. It is a customer as a column, quantity as a column, material or item number as a column, and a material as a column. So if I know multiple columns are there, so what is the requirement? Requirement is basically customer, quantity, material, or maybe what is the material quantity, and that will give you a value, right? So I can have only these four access. There could be multiple levels of columns, but for it to query, it requires only the sufficient data, right? So that is the reason they moved from a row-based architecture to a columnar-based structure. They said everything is going to be columnar tables going forward, right? Read will be happening on the columnar structure. Even the write can be on the row, but your reporting has to be on the read structure, right? So that is where they came with your HANA database, which is more towards your transaction analytics, which is having your in-memory storage, in-memory calculations, and then it is going to be. So this is basically, I said there are two challenges, right? One is basically a storing. Storing is going to be on the row-based structure, but the processing will be on the columnar-based structure, right? Now, normally if you see any system, will have a processes, right? So previously we used to have single core process. So data which has to be processed, it has to be processed through one single core. Now, thanks to the technology, you have your dual cores, octa-core, multiple core processes have come in. So they say the same data gets divided into multiple cores in a CPU. So this data gets parallelly processed. So your data, the same thing when you're doing a report, imagine if it's processed to one single core versus the one which is processed to multiple cores. So this gives me something called as MPP, multiple parallel processing architecture. So HANA is a database, right? As I mentioned, it is going to be an in-memory. It's going to be a transactions as well as analytics. It's more of a columnar structure. And it's going to be more of a multiple parallel processing concept, right? So all these things are going to be, they name this as HANA as a database, right? So when you see your R3 structure, you had a presentation layer, application layer, and a database layer. Now, logically speaking, your application layer, your database layer is merged, right? Though they don't call it as a two-tier architecture, but logically speaking, your data and sync, your everything is happening in memory, right? And you have a presentation layer, which is basically for a UI part of it, user interface, right? So when you say HANA, they call this last year's appliance. When I say appliance, appliance is going to be a combination of software plus hardware. Software plus hardware. Right? So software plus hardware, because previously when you see, it was basically only the software part which GCC was handling, right? Because hardware part was coming from the vendors. Now with the HANA database coming in, though it's all manufactured, but software has to be complying with the hardware requirement. That's when the SAP will term that as an appliance only if they find the software to hardware compatibility is there. That's why they call this as an appliance. Only the certified appliance can be getting into the data center of the client for implementation. Right. So then, so is there any clarification till now? Any questions? Is it clear? I've unmuted anyone. Any clarifications? You can unmute yourself. Okay. So they came out with HANA as a database in 2011. Okay. So they said HANA was purely given as a database, like how your additional other databases were there. They said initially they launched this as a database. 2012, they said, I have a BW system which is sitting on my traditional databases. So I'll give an option of moving BW systems on HANA. First of all, BW systems is used for complex analytical reporting. On top of it, the HANA's functionalities or the HANA's capabilities, it's leveraging to increase the pace in which the reports are getting generated. So people started gaining a little bit of importance on that. 2013, they said the same ECC systems, which is on a traditional database. I'll allow you to move your ECC system on HANA database. Right? This is something called as your DB migration. Right? Or HANA migration. The majority of the projects, if you see, they'll be into this HANA migration. They term this as something called as suit on HANA, or they call it as a business suit on HANA. Your ECC suit sitting on HANA. But these are two different structures. This is different system. This is separate database. Right? So your existing tables, all these things, tables on your T codes, right? Rest all will remain the same. But only thing is that it will be operating on HANA database. 2014, they said, let me see almost from 1992, right, till 2013, if you see, it's almost a long of 21 years. They said, whether the system is good enough to handle all my future technologies. When I say future technologies, a lot of data-driven technologies are going to come in. When I say a lot of data-driven technologies, now they're talking about artificial intelligence, talking about machine learning. They're talking about blockchain. They're talking about augmented reality, virtual reality, mixed reality. They're talking about robotic process, big data. They're talking about RPA, right? All these things are data-driven. Whether the system is good enough to handle this futuristic solutions. They said, let me redefine the system. Let me take it to the next generation of systems, right? From an R3, which is a third generation, to the fourth generation systems. When I say fourth generation systems, how the system has to be designed, right? So they said, let me make this simple. The system a simplified system. Right? When I say simplified, how does simplification get defined here? So simplification, what they said is, I'm going to reduce the system, or I'm going to simplify the system by reducing the number of tables. That I'm reducing the number of T codes by redefining some of the business processes. Right? I'm going to change the way UI is going to be accessed, the way the codes are going to be aligned. Right? So they wanted to make it more of a simplified system, and it is going to be a fourth generation. So that is when they term this as S4, simplified fourth generation system, which is powered by HANA database. They call this as an S4. So your ECC, or they call it as a suit on HANA versus your S4 HANA. Right? So the categories across these 5 pillars of simplification. One is a table level simplification, T-code level simplification, redefining some of the business functionalities, UI they are going to simplify, and the code level, your above codes, which is going to be simplified. The major difference is a suit on HANA will be your ECC system, will be sitting on HANA database. As against it, it will be a single system, which will be a simplified business suite powered by HANA database as one single entity. Many people have this confusion. What is suit on HANA? What is S4 HANA? The differences. It's a architecture change. This year it's all 2 different systems, wherein it's a single system. And this single system will differ from ECC in terms of your simplifications. In terms of your T codes. T codes which is there in ECC might not be there in S4 HANA. They would have removed T codes. Tables would have been removed. Your business functionalities would have been removed. Right? When I say example of business functionalities, your master data. Right? You have a customer master, vendor master in ECC system. Where here they've changed it to something called as your BP, business partner. Right? And for example, your UI. Right? In ECC, it was completely a GUI platform. Wherein it is here, it is going to be a GUI plus something called as Fiori. Your code level. Right? Codes were all defined to be executed at a application layer level here. When you see here, so if I say it is basically your presentation, application, and a database. In ECC, the codes are all written to be executed at database layer level. But now the codes are rewritten to be executed at application layer because application layer is your in-memory storage and your execution there. The codes have to be rewritten. Right? They call this a code push down mechanism. So all these things will be on the simplified mode. So is this clear? So any questions on this?
No, Ram.
Yeah, is it clear? Yeah. So that is where your S4 system has been organized to handle more of a simplified 4th generation software. Right? S4. Right? So this had to be done first in 2014. They said, see, S4, when they wanted to do changes on the simplified platform, it cannot be across all the modules. They said, first, which module to be aligned? First, which module to be aligned? That is when they said, when you normally see how a business operates is, we have something called as a strategic model, functional model, and an operational model. So strategic model is more towards your reporting, planning, budgeting, right? So all your strategic reports, because the strategic model is handled by, especially at a senior level management. Your functional modules is all your core, sales, procurement, and your manufacturing, core modules. The operation modules will be your FI and your HR. Why they call this operational? Because whatever is based on your functionality, the realization happens at the finance side, especially. So for example, your sales, right? Account receivables, procurement, account payables. It's again a finance, right? Then you have production, costing. All these things are going to be realized at the finance side. So what they did is, they said, let us change it. Let us first launch the finance module first. Right? They did some simplifications to the finance. They came out to something called as GL level changes. That said, they came out to something called as universal journal ledger. So then they introduced a lot of changes in the finance, and they said, I'm going to launch the finance module first before I launch the other logistics based module. This happened in 2014. So 2015 onwards, they said, I'm going to launch the logistics module. They launched the logistics module. Right? First, it came out with the simple finance. Right? And there are some, and they changed it to logistics. So many people say it's a simple logistics. Simple logistics is basically a term but it is basically a logistics-based module, S4 logistics. While I say S4 logistics, so previously in your ECC engagement, where we would have multiple consultants, sales consultants, procurement consultants, or manufacturing consultants. Now, the logistics is changing the definition of how you're going to be doing the consulting going forward, right? They're going to have something called as a consolidated approach. So when I say logistics, all these three business functions are interrelated, right? So how they are integrated? These functions are interrelated through your supply chain policy. Who are all the stakeholders in a supply chain? It's going to be suppliers who are going to supply the components. To whom? Manufacturers. Manufacturer are going to manufacture it and give it to whom? Your distributors. Distributors are going to be giving it to whom? Your retailers and your end customers. Right? They're going to give it to multiple people who are going to handle this. They're going to give it to multiple people who are going to handle this. Just give me a minute. Okay. So they're going to handle it to so that's where you see it is no more just a simple entity here. As far as you see, it's no more just a simple entity which is going to be mapped and maintained. So that's where you have consolidated approach. Now, from a consultant's perspective as well, it's going to be more of a consolidated where you have going to have your suppliers, manufacturers. So supply is nothing but your procurement. Manufacturing is nothing but your PP module, right? And this is completely a sales-based module, right? So when they say consulting is more towards how you are aligning it to the supply chain now, right? Previously a single module consultants. Now they're looking at something where a consultant will have a holistic approach in terms of delivering the consulting part. That's where they expect consultants to have a knowledge on sales, procurement, and manufacturing with a simplified concept. Right? Going forward, it's going to be completely an S4 solution, which is going to be more of a simplified concepts. So is it clear? This one? That's where 2015 onwards, they came out with modules. S4 logistics modules and the different versions. Right. So this is basically a demonstration. I have an introduction session and then the next session on S4 HANA, where I'll be talking about what are the different modules. Right. It will going to be on-premise version. They have something called as on-premise version, cloud version. Right. So modules wise, you have a lot of versions. 15.11, they call it 16.10, which launched in different years. 17.09, 18.09, 19.09, 2020, which is the latest one currently, and it's going to be next is 2021. Right? Every year there is a launch that is happening. Right? On the on-premise side. On the cloud side, again, there is a quarterly launches. Every quarter there is going to be one launch which is going to come in. Right? So all these things are going to be your strategic models. So currently, whatever we'll be discussing in our sessions is on the latest model, which is your 2020. Right? 2021 is going to kick off maybe next 2-3 months. It's going to come in. So it's going to be 2020. See, each one will have something called as incremental changes, or they call it as a simplifications across these 5 pillars, as I said. Right? So let me just show you the system. So let me open up for questions parallelly so that by the time I log into the system, we can take up some questions, which is. Yeah.
Hi, Ram.
Yeah.
Yeah, my name is Dinesh.
Yeah, Dinesh.
Ram, like what kind of model included in the logistic? Like, I am from MM background. Like,
Okay.
which could be included here?
So normally, see, when you talk about a logistics model, it's included when you say it's inclusion of your sales topics, your procurement topics, as well as your production-based topics, where you have an MRP integrations, right?
Okay.
So all these three things will be included on the simplification side of it, majorly.
Okay.
On the simplifications, yes, some of the core functionalities will be discussing the core, but it'll be more of a simplification-oriented based discussions as well. When I say simplification, what have actually changed? For example, you would have worked on vendor master, right?
Yeah.
Now no more vendor master; it's completely BP. The structure itself is completely changed, right? Your configs have changed here, right? All these things have actually got changed now. So how you're going to, whenever you're considering it for a new implementation, what are the things that needs to be aligned with?
Okay. Like if we say that like like any other model is there, only for the logistic it's included.
I didn't get your points. What you're saying is when you say
like yeah, in if we say that in ECC we calling like if we come for HANA, like which is the right and suitable model?
See, is the right model in S4HANA. It is sourcing and procurement.
Okay.
So is basically seen as something called as completely your metals management, right? Which includes your procurement and inventory, right? So now in S4, what they're saying is it is completely on your sourcing. So sourcing itself is seen as very strategic model now, right? So because you're sourcing, you're going to integrate with previously you had your SRM integrations, right? On the procurement side. Now you'll have integrations to Ariba now.
Yeah.
Right? We have an integration to Ariba where it is taking care of how your sourcing is aligned now. How your suppliers are onboarded, right from the time your suppliers are aligned and they're onboarded till they're offboarded, they are part of this Ariba ecosystem. Okay. Right? So that is where you have a sourcing, because S4 with Ariba integration is also there here. That's why sourcing is in a strategic model, and procurement. Procurement is actually your procurement processes.
Yeah.
Right? And of course, you have an inventory which is aligned to procurement directly.
Okay.
It's called as sourcing and procurement as part of S4. That's the reason if you see your S4, they call it as S4 sourcing and procurement. They don't call it as MM now going forward.
Yeah. Okay.
Right? And they don't call it as sales and distribution, because distribution is again a part of sales activity. So I said that's the reason they call it as an S4 sales. They no more call it as an SD. Right? And even the S4 PP, they don't call it as a production planning, because they generalize it with a term called as manufacturing.
Okay.
So logistics is basically an S4 sales, sourcing and procurement, and a manufacturing integration.
Okay. Okay.
Right?
Yeah. Thank you, Ram.
Yeah. So now this is basically a system. It looks to be similar to your EC system, but actually speaking, when you go to the nodes wise, there is a difference here. Right? When you see here, this is complete in S4 systems. And for example, when you say you are a procurement, right? So from procurement standpoint, you had your, when you see your ECC, you had your WM integration, right? Now going forward, there's no more WM now. Yeah, WM is completely moved. What they integrated is your EWM system, but EWM is not a part of S4 logistics. It itself is a separate entity, right? It's an extension of your procurement, where at a storage location level, you are having it. It will be a part of sourcing and procurement. Because beyond your storage location, previously you had your WM. Right now, there's no more WM. It is completely an warehouse management. That's why they call it as an EWM. Extended warehouse management is integrated into the same box now. Yeah, that I'll be discussing in the next introduction session, how these modules are integrated into S4. Okay, this is basically your S4 interface. And you have one more interface to this, which is basically a Fiori interface. So this is basically a Fiori, which is access to a browser. So going forward, what will happen is Fiori is nothing but all your they've categorized all this frequently accessed transactions into form of tiles. While I say tiles, I'll just show you. So from a business standpoint, they will not have an access to the backend going forward. It will be only a Fiori-based integration, Fiori-based thing, which will be given to access to the business standpoint, from a business user standpoint, right? Because at the end of the day, when I'm doing transaction codes, I was executing in my backend GUI. But going forward, now they have categories saying that why should I have transactions? Now the generation of users are changed, right? Now we have moved to more towards a smartphone we are working, right? But click of a button, I need to have the application open in front of me. I can open it. I can open it in browsers. It supports all browsers, Internet Explorer or your Google Chrome or Mozilla Firefox. There is an issue. Let me check. Okay, good. Now I've got it. See, these are all your individual tiles, right? These are all your individual tiles. So suppose what we will normally use is take an example of your inventory management. Why I'm taking this inventory? Because it becomes common for all the modules which have been accessed. Suppose if I want to, rather than going to your MMB transaction here, I want to go and check all the materials in that particular plant, or I want to specifically go and check specific material here, right, against the particular plant. Right. This is from previously your existing ECC structure. We are doing it, or your backend structure. We are doing it now. Now I say I want to go and check for all the materials in the plant. The interface wise, they've completely changed, so the business can directly access this. See, you get to see all the materials for the particular plant here. Right, I want to have specific materials. I can go and enter specific materials. I'll have to just go and enter and click on. So this is basically how you get your inventory report. See here, what is the stock availability? What is unrestricted? What is the stock in QA? What is the stock in blocked? All these things gets just here. If I want to have, I can export into an Excel. If I want to share to anyone, directly I can integrate it. Or I want to see here, this is an Excel, or I want to share it with someone, or I want to save this thing as a tile. I can just save this as a tile. Stock multiple materials, specific. I can go and save this. So I've already set up a filter. So I've already, I'm not going for a generalized thing. So what I do, like how you set up your variant. So I can directly go and click on this. Every time if someone has set this thing, they click on this particular tile. You see here, it will always be specific to the two materials. Wherever the changes that are happening, it will start reflecting immediately. Suppose I want to say I do not want so much of information, I can filter it out. So I want to say I want only my material. I want only my material description, plan. I want only the stock. I don't want special stock type. I do not want any storage location. Only at the plant level since I'm doing it. So I'm just how I'm structuring my report. So from a business standpoint, is more than sufficient for them rather than giving them the transactions and then making things complex for them. So it's more than sufficient for them. So like this, you can have. Right, and you have something called as a procurement overview. So you have your analytical tiles. So suppose if I say, I want to see I want to see a report specific to one particular supplier, or I want to specifically see how my supplier performance or all that specific to one particular supplier. Specific to one supplier, I'm going to see all these things. So you see here. So what the supplier, what are the contracts the supplier is aligned with? What are the RFQs the supplier is aligned with? What are the purchase order items that are there? So what is basically your purchase requisition item types, right? So what are the different purchase requisition, and what are the confirmations that the supplier is having, right? And what is basically a supplier performance monitoring? I'm just giving you just one of the tile, but like this, I have for all the modules, a lot of tiles are there. Especially from a business standpoint, these are standard reports. It's not customized. Imagine if you are to customize this. Imagine how many number of tables, how many number of things needs to be accessed, how complex it is to be different. This is standard report which is available. From a business standpoint, they can just see this report and they can take the decisions based on this. That's the power of Fiori now coming in. The same thing is available in sales. The same thing is available in purchasing, procurement, your production, right? All this model, they have the similar thing. So that's the reason you can create transactions. You can generate reports, real-time reporting with the existing data in the database. Right. So this is about your Fiori. Right. So let me open up for questions. Any questions or something we can address it and we can wind up this session. Yeah. Unmuted everyone. You can just unmute yourself and we can have any discussion on this. Yeah. Yeah, Ramakrishna, you have any questions? Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah, Ramakrishna.
So we have shave one as a tile, right?
Yeah.
When you click it, so that we can able to see only who saved that person. Or they can able to see other also.
No, it is user specific there. Okay. So what happens is, so generic tiles will be, because every tile will have something called as role attached to it. Right? You assign the role to your user, will getting the standard tile, but that role will be standard. But when you're doing a specific tile, it will be against your user. So suppose if I saved it here, stock multiple metals, ROMs, physics. Suppose if Ramakrishna Reddy is basically accessing it, he will not be able to see the tile because this will be a role specific, user specific.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So if they want to see all users, so we need to assign.
It has to be because it's specific to their requirement, right? So I put 2 metals there. It is specific to my requirement.
And one more. So if user any new G report or something, right? If is developing any G report, so if they want to tile name for that G report, so how we can find out the roles? So at that time we need to check with the Fiori
consultants. Yeah, because when you create a Z report, right? Because there is a specific set of roles are there. There's something called as business catalogs, business groups. A lot of things are there on the Fiori side. Right, all these things needs to be sure because you will have something called as your Fiori application. So when I open this particular tile, so for example,
my question is how we can find that roles. So if we want to get some specific roles, right? So Fiori consultant, they will ask the roles, right? To function consultant.
Yeah. See, what happens is there is something called as Fiori apps library. There is something called as Fiori app library. For this particular tile, there is a role assigned to it. There'll be role. Once you assign that take the particular role, because this is available in your Google directly. So here, let me open it.
But if you develop G report, right? So
in their cases, there will be a Z role. You'll have to create a Z role there.
Okay.
See,
so in Fiori library, you can able to find only standard Fiori tile.
Yeah. So see, every Fiori tile will have a specific role, but this is only for standard reports. Okay. Standard reports directly released by SAP. Suppose if I'm doing a custom report, custom Fiori tile, right? So in that cases, there will be a Z role as well, right? And that Z role has to be assigned to the users whoever wants this custom report.
Okay.
Because this is not available in part of your Fiori apps library, wherein this is available in your Fiori apps library. Because this is for all the standard released functionalities, wherein this is for custom functionalities. It's specific to the custom requirement, right?
So the G role, our Fiori consultant will do, or a function consultant?
No, normally it will be on security consultants. You have your PFCG transaction. There is a PFCG transaction, right?
Okay.
Using the PFCG transaction, they create the Z roles and assign it to the specific user.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Understood.
Yeah. So if there are no questions, maybe we can wind it up. And there'll be an introduction session where I'll be discussing an extension of this. Because if there are some people who are joining new the session, we'll be giving an overview and then we're getting into extension of this. We'll discuss about what are the different versions on on-premise and cloud that has come. Yeah. So that it will be completely into the S4HANA discussion. Yeah. I hope this discussion was useful to understand about where is S4HANA, how S4HANA came in. Next, in the details of S4HANA, we'll be discussing in the introduction session on S4. So let us, they'll keep you updated with the next session that is going to be coming on the introduction part. So you can just join. They'll be sending you the links. You can join with that particular links. Thanks for attending. I hope this discussion was useful in understanding on the S4 side of it.
Thank you for attending the session. I hope you all enjoyed it. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. Also, feel free to ask your questions in the comment section below, and we will reply to them at the earliest.